Good evening. Thanks for coming out on this rainy night. A little foggy out there. I'm Alan Canestrari. I'm the Associate Professor of Education in the School of Education. And I'd like to welcome you to Roger Williams University and to putting equity back into action. This conference is the first of what we hope will be an annual conference for educators in the region. As you might know, it's been an exciting week here at Roger Williams with the inauguration of Donald J. Farish, PhD, the gentleman to my right here, the 10th president of Roger Williams University. We're delighted that you all could be part of the festivities, and we'd like to thank the Office of the President and also the Office of the Provost and also the Inauguration Committee for folding this event into the inauguration festivities. We're happy to talk a little bit about the inauguration week. It's been really fantastic. We've received a memorable speech by Andrew Young, who's the noted civil rights activist and United Nations ambassador. And the investiture ceremony was attended by national, state, local dignitaries who offered greetings and congratulatory wishes. But highlighting the ceremony was a presidential address in which President Farish outlined his transformative vision for the university. A vision which I feel, and I think we'll all discover, promises to widen the circle of possibilities for all learners. We're thrilled to have the President here with us this evening. At this time, I would like to invite the President to the podium for some opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here, and it has been a busy week, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I won't be able to stay and listen to our distinguished speaker tonight. I really would like to do that, but I have a house full of relatives who are leaving in the morning, and I haven't seen them, so it's they're waiting dinner for my return. But I appreciate the invitation, and it's interesting what a good connection there is between this workshop, this program, and what it was that I had to say yesterday. And I just want to underscore this a little bit because it's something that I feel very strongly about. As some of you, if you read some of what I had to say or were there, you know that I was the first in my family to go to school. And for me, higher education was this transformative experience. The grandson of an immigrant baker getting a chance to really do something with his life, and I have been eternally grateful for the opportunities that I was given that came about because I had access to higher education. I had no real idea that I was going to end up as a college president. That was not my ambition. I was wanting to be a scientist. I did that for a while, but here I am. And I think it's terribly important that those of us that benefited from the golden years of higher education in this country, when things were good, make sure that that same possibility exists for the people coming behind. It's a real challenge to create what we might call affordable access, high-quality education that still is affordable. All the campuses, private or public, are facing this as a challenge. And one of the issues for this university in particular, and I've heard it from students and faculty and staff, we need to be a more diverse campus. We are not broadly reflective of the society that we serve. And we are, in that sense, doing a disservice to our students who are here because the world that you should be living in right now should be as diverse as the world that you're going to be living in. And if you're going to be adequately prepared for that world, this is the place to do it. And we just aren't getting the job done yet. Well, what does that mean? What it means is that we have to figure out ways of being more inclusive among the students that we admit. But that's a challenge because all of you know that we are a tuition-driven institution. And the very people that we seek to bring in are the ones that most often require a great deal of aid. And the consequence is we're caught on the horns of a dilemma. How do we create affordable access to that population of people who need and deserve a chance to show what they can do, a chance to climb the socioeconomic ladder and assume their rightful place in society. How do we make that happen at a private school that costs as much as Roger Williams does? We have some scholarships. We're doing some work in that area. But I think the way in which we will ultimately resolve this problem, in part, will depend on our ability to be able to develop new cash streams, both from philanthropy and also from outreach work that we'll do with adult education, where there are some real possibilities, corporate work where non-credit work is being sought by the corporations that are wanting to improve the skill set of their employees. These are things we can do, and we've done some of. If we do more of it, we will begin to resolve part of the problem because we'll have more money for scholarships. But the other piece of this problem, and this is where tonight comes in, the other piece is that we have to be sure that the students who are wanting to get the fruits of what a higher education degree will bring to them, that those students have the skill set at the time that they go to college to get in. Many of these students are now in low-performing schools in urban areas. It's a special need issue, and we need people with the passion and the dedication and the understanding and the commitment to serve that population, to make sure that they aren't left off or out of the American dream. I really commend your presence here tonight. I know we've got a good mixture of teachers as well as prospective teachers. That's great. We have a wonderful guest speaker tonight that I really wish I could hear, but I'll get a transcript. And I want to applaud and acknowledge the good work being done by the faculty in the School of Education, because this is something that is above and beyond. They don't have to do this. They're giving up their Friday and their weekend as well. But the commitment that Roger Williams is making to see to it that those people who are working or wanting to work in an urban setting have the right set of tools and the right understandings to be effective in what they want to do is a wonderful commitment. And it is a way of making this program here at Roger Williams distinctive and terribly meaningful. So I couldn't be more pleased to see this commitment from the school, because it meshes so well with what my hopes are for Roger Williams, which is to be a more inclusive, more outreaching campus that better serves the needs of our society than we've been able to do heretofore. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I wish you very good luck. Thanks for your commitment for being here tonight, and have a great conference.
I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker back to Rhode Island. Yes, it's a bit of a homecoming for him. He received his bachelor's degree in sociology and history and teaching credentials from Brown University in 1981. He earned his master's degree in sociology from Brown in 1982 and his doctorate in sociology from UC Berkeley in '89. Dr. Noguera was a classroom teacher in public schools in Providence, Rhode Island, Central High School, as it turns out, and Oakland, California. Pedro Noguera is the Peter L. Agnew Professor of Education at New York University. He is an urban sociologist whose scholarship and research focuses on the ways in which schools are influenced by social and economic conditions in the urban environment. He holds faculty appointments in departments of teaching and learning and humanities and the social sciences at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Development, as well as in the Department of Sociology at New York University. Dr. Noguera is also the executive director of the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education and co-director of the Institute for Study of Globalization and Education in Metropolitan Settings. In 2008, he was appointed by the Governor of New York to serve on the State University of New York, Board of Trustees. He has held tenured faculty appointments at Harvard Graduate School of Education and at the University of California, Berkeley. He has published over 150 research articles, monographs, and research reports, as well as 5 books on topics such as urban school reform, conditions that promote student achievement, youth violence, the potential impact of school choice and vouchers on urban public schools, and race and ethnic relations in American society. Very busy man. We're happy that he's here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pedro Noguera.
It was a little bit like I'm supposed to testify. Good evening. It's great to be here. I want to thank Alan and the other faculty in the School of Education here, and all of you for coming out on a Friday night. I know that Friday night lectures are not often a priority for people, but so I appreciate your being here. And as Alan said, it's always good to come back to Rhode Island, having spent 4 good years here, including some of my earliest exposures to education. And I want to start with that because I think those early exposures taught me a lot about both the good and the bad of public education. I want to start by saying that I characterize my own position, my own outlook on education as that of a critical optimist. I am critical because I've seen too much that is troubling, that disturbs me, that's going on in our schools, but nonetheless I remain optimistic because I also see lots of things that inspire me, in the work of teachers who work against great odds, in the work of children who overcome great obstacles to get to school, in their parents who remain hopeful, and in others who have not given up on the belief that public education is the key to a democratic society. And as I said, I learned that firsthand through experience right in Providence. As a sophomore, I was taking an ed psych course. And I was, as part of the course, one of the requirements of the course is we had to do a practicum at a local school. And I was sent to a school not far from Brown on the east side called Camp Street. And I was told that my job would be to work with a kindergarten teacher. And when I showed up, she said, well, I need help with these 5 little boys who are giving me a hard time. It turned out that already 3 of them had been suspended, which I thought was incredulous that you could suspend a 5-year-old. And although that I had no experience or training, I figured, how hard could it be to deal with some 5-year-olds? And so I showed up, and the first day I quickly realized it was harder than I thought, right? Because these were 5-year-olds who had lots of energy. These were not bad children. They were children who simply had trouble sitting still for very long. And as I think many of us know, if you have trouble sitting still for long, you often get in trouble in school. Because so much of what school does is to reward obedience and the ability to listen passively. And they had trouble with that. And so I realized that I had to help these kids to figure out how to do school. And I knew how to do school because I had mastered it to some degree. And I also knew how that one of the keys was figuring out how to engage them. And although I had no training, I decided the next time I show up at the school, I would show up with a football. And I proceeded to play football with these little boys for the first half hour because I figured the first thing I needed to do was to tire them out. Because if I got their energy out, then maybe I could actually talk to them, maybe I could get to know them and find out who they were, what they cared about, and figure out how to build a relationship. So the first thing I learned, and I learned that over the course of the semester I spent with them, was that it is far more effective to channel the energy of our children than to try to crush it or to break their will, which I think continues to happen in far too many schools. The other thing I learned through that experience was that if you don't have relationships with the children, some of them will choose not to learn from you. And surprisingly, and it surprised the kindergarten teacher I was working with, these children became willing to learn from me, willing to do all kinds of things because of the bonds that we formed very early. A couple years later, I was asked to do my student teaching at Central High School. And I was again warned that Central High School was not exactly one of the best schools in Providence, in fact, the opposite. And I get there, I'm going to teach 11th graders American history. And my mentor teacher tells me right at the beginning, he says, listen, your job when you teach American history is to get the kids from the Revolution in September to Vietnam in June. That's the job. Here's the book. I'll be in the back watching. I said, okay, well, wait a second. How about the Constitution? The Constitution is very complicated. He said, listen, don't get caught up in the Constitution. He says, because you've got to get to the Civil War by Christmas. And I said, well, the Civil War is really complicated. He said, you don't get it, do you? He says, you've got to get through this whole book. You've got to be at the Depression by Easter. Okay. And in that very short conversation, it became clear to me that this was not really about teaching with respect to ensuring that children actually learn something. It was about covering material, which is not the same. And over again, I'm going to schools where I find teachers who confuse teaching with talking. Teachers who think that covering the material is the same as teaching the material. Teachers who refuse to take any responsibility for whether or not the students they serve are actually learning. And I would say that's part of the crisis that we're in right now in public education. Because we have far too many kids in schools who are not learning very much, who are not coming away inspired, who are not coming away better able to navigate the world around them. And especially now where we're fixated on testing, I've come to see preparing for test as being the most important thing. And therefore, when the test is over, the teacher and the students are not sure what to do. Got a call from a reporter from a very affluent community in Connecticut who said the teachers are saying that the kids have taken the test, they've done very well, and there are 6 weeks left in the year and they don't know what to do. She said, what would you say to them? I said, well, now they get to do all the interesting things that they couldn't do before. She said, like what? I said, well, they could go outside and study the beach, and they could study the stars. They could do all kinds of things. She said, really? I said, yeah, really. She said, how come they haven't thought of that? I said, because they've gotten so accustomed to the idea that the only thing that matters is that which is on the test. Because increasingly that's what is considered high standards in American education. So sad, isn't it? Such a distortion. But that's where we are. And that's the reason why I find myself in the middle of so many of the debates today taking place in the country, and literally in the middle. Because I don't see things in the black and white terms in which they've been portrayed. I really do believe it was wrong to fire all those teachers in Central Falls, Rhode Island. I believe it was wrong, and the proof it was wrong is they had to hire them again. Right? How silly was that? But I also believe that the issues being raised about teacher responsibility, about changing the schedule so that teachers can actually work to meet student needs, those are issues that we can't simply dismiss. I support unions, but I don't support unions that protect people that should not be teaching. And anybody who believes that teachers really matter should be opposed to any strategy that is aimed at keeping people in the classroom who really don't like kids in the first place and can't teach very well either. And anybody who would argue and tell me that that's not true, well, then you haven't been to the schools I've been to. Because I've been to far too many schools where I see teachers who really should not be in the classroom. Someone needs to help them. They're not even happy about it. They're unhappy people. They're miserable, and they make their children miserable. But they've got pensions, they've got benefits, they've got other reasons for staying that really have nothing to do at all with education, have everything to do with a job. And I understand the need to have a job, especially in this economy, but education is so important. And the teaching profession is so important. That if we don't realize that part of elevating the stature of teachers is to say not everybody should be a teacher. And we should really find ways to help people who are not good at it to stop being teachers. It is hard to say that the teaching profession is so important if just anybody can become a teacher. and it becomes so hard to remove them. And that's not to say I'm against unions, because I say right away that you need unions to protect teachers from arbitrary administrators or from political commissioners who know nothing about education and will impose their ideas on schools. Were it not for the unions, then who would combat, who would defend the rights of teachers against policies that are not even rooted in evidence, they're rooted in ideology? Because what's happening right now, in the name of reform, we see a whole host of strategies that are not rooted in research, they're rooted in ideology. Who says that judging teachers by test scores is a good idea? What evidence is there to support that? But that's what they're trying to do. I'll tell you this, if you want to come up with a way to discourage teachers from teaching high-need students, do that. Do that, because the kids who are hardest to demonstrate growth on those tests will be the teachers, those teachers will be penalized for teaching those students. Special needs students, students with interrupted education, students who come to us not speaking English, students who've been so discouraged for so long that they've given up on learning. Who's going to teach those students if we're going to judge them by test scores alone? Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking for evidence of learning. We absolutely better look for evidence of learning, otherwise we're really in trouble. And that's why I say I'm in the middle of the debate, because while I'm opposed to policies that are ideological, that are really designed to try to control teachers and educators, but not really focused on how do we create schools where children are excited about learning, right? I'm also not in favor of the status quo. Status quo is destroying our children. I'm a critic of No Child Left Behind. Why would we think that pressuring schools, using shame and humiliation is a good strategy? Isn't that what we do in No Child Left Behind? We put up a list, we say this is a failing school. And almost always, if you know the race and the socioeconomic status of the children, those schools that serve the neediest children are almost always at the bottom, aren't they? Why? Because of the strong correlation between income and parent education and academic performance. We've known that for years, haven't we? Sure we have. ETS, the Educational Testing Service, is known for years. The strongest predictor for how well a student will do on the SAT is family income. Family income. We don't control family income very much. So why would we want to put so much emphasis on test scores and on threats and on shame and humiliation? And to show you how ludicrous it becomes, go visit the state of Florida. The state of Florida decided several years ago to put letter grades on schools. They could let everybody know. It was an A school, a B school, all the way down to an F school. Now, I would think that if the state decides this school deserves an F, the school should be closed. It's like saying this building's condemned. If we allow people to keep going in there, then the state should be sued. But I go to visit Edison High School, and it's a triple F school. Edison High School in Miami. And I said, principal, how do you get to be a triple F school? He said, well, you simply fail the state exam 3 years in a row. I said, what happens if you fail again? He said, well, we will fail again, because 90% of our children don't speak English. So they won't pass an exam in English. And the state says this time they'll take us over. I said, are you worried? He said, not at all. I said, why not? He said, well, the first thing you should know is I'm quitting this job at the end of the year. And everybody I spoke to described this principal as committed, hardworking, dedicated, but he was tired. He was tired of being beaten down. He was tired of the shame and humiliation. He said, I'm out of here. He said, the crazy thing, though, is this. He said, do you think the state of Florida would know what to do if they got control of this school? Do you think the state is holding back on some secret recipe that they're now going to make available to those children if they get control of Edison High School? What's the record of state takeovers across the country? One of total failure. Because the state departments of education don't know what to do to run schools. All they think they know how to do is judge schools. But judging schools and helping schools are not the same thing. And right now, No Child Left Behind, all it does is tell us who's failing and who's not according to tests they've taken. It doesn't tell us anything at all about what to do to help. Which is why the way we're using testing is such a total distortion. Why would we think that kids will get smarter simply by testing them? Everyone who knows anything about assessment knows the only value in assessment is assessment is a tool, is if it's used for diagnostic purposes. If you assess students to figure out what their needs are, and then you get the information back to their teachers in a timely manner, so they can use that information and teach them. Well, how do we do it? We test them in the spring, give the teachers the results in the fall when they no longer have the students. Not very wise, is it? That's because we're using testing for ranking purposes, not for helping, not for diagnosing. That'd be like going to the doctor, and you go to the doctor gives you an exam, and the doctor says, well, you're overweight, you've got high blood pressure, you look really sick, see you later. I said, well, wait a second, no, what's next? I said, no, I just diagnose. You're ranking you, I'm ranking you, you're really sick. Right? I said, well, that's not good enough, right? We actually want doctors who can help people. And the job of schools and state departments of education, not simply to tell people that they're failing, or that they're doing well. Should be to say, what do we do to help? How do we address this problem? How do we address this challenge? How do we create schools where kids are excited to learn? How do we create schools where poverty is not an obstacle to learning? The fact is that in many places it is, for obvious reasons. We have hungry children in America who show up at school hungry. Hard to learn if you're hungry, aren't you? Isn't it? We have kids showing up at school who have trouble reading because they need eyeglasses. No provision in No Child Left Behind to get kids eyeglasses, to make sure they see a dentist, to make sure they're fed. It's ironic because that slogan, leave no child behind, didn't come from the Bush administration. It came from the Children's Defense Fund. But when Marian Wright Edelman came up with the slogan, leave no child behind, she wasn't thinking we should test them as frequently as possible. She had something different in mind. She was thinking we need to make sure that all our children get their basic needs met, because in fact, all those countries that we like to compare ourselves to, the countries that keep surpassing us in math and science and literacy, all those countries do things we don't do. Like universal access to preschool. Wow, what a great idea. Especially since we've known for years that the learning that happens during infancy lays the foundation for learning that occurs throughout the life of a child. And that the achievement gap is first and foremost a preparation gap. And if you don't address that early childhood education, children come to kindergarten already far behind. Because poor kids typically know significantly fewer words than middle-class children from college-educated parents. The Koreans know that. The Canadians know that. The French, the Dutch. Somehow that's not part of our agenda or our strategy. They also know that healthcare is important. And that treating teachers like a real professional is really critical. That's what they do in Finland. An honored profession. But we wring our hands and we say, why are we falling further behind? And then we come up with even more draconian measures to control schools, tighter restrictions, scripted curriculum. Because instead of trusting educators and investing in education, we take the opposite approach. And not surprisingly, it doesn't work. And so, almost 11 years after No Child Left Behind was enacted, we have dropout rates of 50% and higher in almost every major city in the United States. If there weren't any clearer evidence that this hasn't worked, that's it. So now Secretary Duncan says, okay, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to shut him down. All right? As he talks tough. Let's shut down the dropout factory. Shut them down. Sounds so good. I said, well, wait a second, because I know the secretary. I said, problem is bigger than that. I said, because for every failing high school, there's a failing middle school feeding right into it, and a failing elementary school right underneath it. So you're going to have to shut down lots more schools then. And where are the children going to go to school? It's as smart as firing the teachers in Central Falls. If you don't have a strategy for who's going to replace them, what have you accomplished? What have you done? You know, if the CEO of General Motors said, I'm going to improve General Motors by shutting down all the factories, I say, what kind of guy is this? Job is to get people to buy cars, right? Not to shut down factories. We should be focused on how to create schools that are models of learning, places where children are excited to be. And guess what? Those schools exist right now. Right now, they exist. And what I find so odd about the moment we're in is we don't learn from those schools. Why aren't we studying those schools? Why aren't we giving the educators who are struggling a chance to visit those schools so they can see this is what it looks like when you do well? And I'm not talking about the affluent schools that are serving the most affluent children who have private tutors and moms who take them to gymnastics. Okay, they're supposed to do well because they have everything they need. And guess what? Not all of them are doing well either right now, even with all the resources, because the whole paradigm is distorted, focused on the wrong things. But there are schools like Brockton High School, not far from here, the largest high school in Massachusetts, 4,000 students, in the top 10% of high schools in the state. How'd they do it at Brockton? Well, just before the state imposed their high-stakes exams, the MCAS, the toughest exams in the country, because Massachusetts has the highest standards of all states in the country, the teachers got together and said, our kids will never pass this exam unless we do something different, because they arrive at high school too far behind academically. They can't read at grade level. And they decided that the only way that they would be able to succeed in preparing their students for these exams is if every teacher at Brockton High School became a teacher of literacy. Math teachers, science teachers, music teachers, and that's what they did. And it was teachers training teachers, after school, on Saturdays, very consistently focusing on both how to teach literacy, but also what our strategy would be so that there would be consistency across the curriculum. And it took them 3 years, but today, Brockton High School, with over 75% of the students low income, over 75% of the students minority, many of whom come from families where English is not spoken as their first language, is one of the best high schools in the state of Massachusetts. Has been for the last several years. I would think that the Secretary of Education, the Commissioner of Education from Rhode Island, and other states, they should all go, let's go to Brockton and see. Because we have schools here that aren't doing it. But that's not happening. That's why I say the strategies are not research-based, they're not evidence-based, they're based on ideology, they're based on politics. Politics is killing American education. Politics is our biggest obstacle. And I don't simply mean Republican, Democrat, because Democrats come up with many of the same bad ideas. It's bipartisan bad politics. It's narrow-minded thinking. It's the thinking that preparing children for a test is the same as educating children for life. Wow, what a distortion. What a mistake. But there are schools that are showing us we can do this. It's at a school like that in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. PS 28. In New York, we are very creative with our names. And I was asked by the principal there, Pedro, I want you to come visit my school. She kept calling on me. I said, okay, I'm going to come. And I come and I'm greeted, and she says, welcome to my school. And the first thing that strikes me is that the guard, because every school in New York has a guard, is friendly. How unusual. And the school has beautiful artwork and plants in the hall, and so I'm already struck by the beauty. She says, let's go into some classrooms. And she introduced me to her secretary. She said, this is the person who really runs the school. She does all the administrative work. And I laughed. I said, well, what do you do? She said, I'm the lead teacher. She said, I didn't become a principal to escape the classroom. I became a principal to lead the classroom. So we're in the classroom. And I start to notice that in every classroom I'm in, there are 2, 3, sometimes 4 adults in a classroom. I said, wow, how do you get so many adults in the classroom? She said, well, that one is our social worker, that one is a special ed teacher, that one's the librarian. If she's not in the library, she's in a classroom. She said, we use all of our staff to work with our kids because they don't believe that differentiated instruction is one teacher figuring out how to teach 30 kids with different abilities. They think, no, differentiated instruction happens by getting different adults to work with different students to meet their needs. And I'm watching, and the kids are working. And at one point, a little boy raises his hand, and the teacher looks at him, nods her head. He gets up out of his seat to go to the bathroom. Now, I'm struck by this because in many schools I visit, going to the bathroom is a major issue. Have to have guards in the hallway, have to have surveillance cameras. And this little boy goes to the bathroom. Within a few minutes, he's back. I said, I'm very impressed. She said, why? I said, well, I didn't see anybody watch him. I didn't see anybody monitor him, but he went and came back to his seat right away. She said, listen, my kids have to walk on the most dangerous streets in New York City every day. If I can't teach them to use the bathroom responsibly, what have I accomplished there? She explains to me that her school stays open every night till 8 o'clock. I said, how do you do that? She said, well, my teachers don't stay that late. I have a second shift that comes in from the Y. We have a partnership with the YMCA, and they run arts programs, music programs, academic help programs. Kids get swimming lessons on Thursdays because she believes her kids need a well-rounded education that includes art and music and phys ed. She also believes that since 40% of her children are homeless and the shelter doesn't open till 8 o'clock, that they shouldn't be on the streets in the cold waiting for the shelter to open. So she'd rather have them in school. So she built a partnership with the Y. She explains to me, then she also built a partnership with a job training agency because she wants to make sure that parents who want it can get their GED. And those who want it can learn English. And others can get job training as a nurse's aide or as a security guard. And you see parents in class studying. And I said, well, who runs this? She said, well, I just give my space up. I let them use my space to do this because she believes that if the parents are educated and employed, they'll actually do a better job with their children. She takes me, let me show you my professional development. She takes me to a room, and there are 2 social workers running a professional development workshop for 8 teachers, mix of veteran and new teachers. And the workshop is focused on how to respond to the social and emotional needs of children. And teachers are posing questions. One teacher said, I have a child who has attachment issues. He's attached to my leg, and I can't teach him. And the social worker said, okay, you're going to have to get him to earn your attention. Try this, and gives him some ideas. Said, come back tomorrow and let us know how it works. Another teacher says, I have a kid with anxiety. Another says, I have a kid with aggression. And I'm listening to the conversation, to the problem solving that's going on among the teachers and these social workers about their children. And I said, what made you decide to offer this as a form of professional development for your staff? She said, until I did, my teachers were referring too many of my children for special education. And my kids come to school stressed. Many of them are needy. Many of them are anxious. My teachers have to be more skilled to work with this population of kids. She takes me to meet her guidance counselor. She said, before I introduce you to him, I'll have to let you know, I got him from the rubber room. Okay? Now, those of you who are not New Yorkers don't know about the rubber room. The rubber room is a place where they put teachers that nobody wants. You get written up and you can be sent there. And you can be sent there sometimes for years. And you'll sit in this room and do crossword puzzles or yoga and collect your check. It's like purgatory. I said, how do you know to get this man out of the rubber room? So, well, I don't know why he was there. When I found out he was there, I requested him because he had been my guidance counselor when I was in school. And I knew he was good. He saved my life. So now he's working with me at my school, and so we go in, and he's there with a little boy. And they're talking casually, and I introduce myself, and I ask the little boy, why are you here? He says, well, I'm learning how to be good. I said, you're learning how to be good? He said, yes. He said, I'm tired of being sitting out in the classroom all the time. I said, wow. And as I left, it was clear to me that this school also had a very different approach to discipline, because they didn't think that sending kids home to watch TV or play video games was an effective form of discipline. They really did think that helping children to learn how to control their behavior was part of the discipline strategy. So I'm so impressed, I'm shaking my head. I said, wow, this is amazing. I said, I'm going to tell Joel Klein about this, the chancellor. He said, well, let me show you one more thing that's going to impress him. So we go into her office, and she shows me her data system. And she explains to me that every single student at the school is being monitored. They know exactly where they are. They're following their progress. They do that so that they can intervene quickly if children are not making progress in reading or math or in some other subject. And they keep samples of their work in portfolios so they can actually see if they can really write. Let's see the work. Can they read? What does the file say? Very deliberate, very targeted, very focused. Nothing left to chance. So I leave there and I write an email to the chancellor, Joel Klein. I said, listen, Joel, you need to go visit PS 28 because she's doing extraordinary things there. 2 days later, he does. And he's equally impressed. So he sends out an email to 1,700 principals in New York City describing PS 28, except he only mentions one thing, the data system. He was very pleased to see them using the data system because they just spent $20 million on that data system. And he's happy to see someone who's using it. I said, Joel, I'm glad to see you went to the school, but you missed it. Because it's not just the data system. It's everything else together that makes this work. It's the social and emotional learning. It's the extended day. It's the parent education. All of it has to come together for a school like this to work. But he didn't get it. And that's the reason why he and I were in this ongoing debate. Because he believed that poverty should not be an excuse for achievement. And anybody who makes it an excuse is making excuses, and therefore he was kind of tough-nosed. No, we're going to focus on teacher effectiveness. We're going to hold teachers accountable. And I have to say, look, on the one hand, I think that's a progressive step. Certainly better than blaming children, which is where we were in this country. We used to blame children, say their race or their culture or their genes made them less able. So Joel doesn't buy that. I respect that. But anybody who thinks that poverty is not an issue, not an obstacle, that we have to at least mitigate, contend with, doesn't understand the reality of our children or the reality of the schools that serve them. But that's the debate we're having in the country. Poverty is not a learning disability. Definitely not. But we have many children who's come to school less able to learn, less able to perform because of non-academic issues that are getting in the way. That would affect any one of us. But we don't have a vision large enough that allows us to address those issues. And so we continue to fall further and further behind, particularly the schools that are serving the neediest children. So I remain a critical supporter because I am critical of much of what I see going on in public education. Critical of seeing schools where failure has been normalized, where the adults act like they had nothing to do with it, even though the kids are not learning and every adult is being paid. They act like it's not their responsibility. I'm critical of that. I have no tolerance, no patience for it. I had a principal come to me and said, she was a brand new principal. She said, my kids have a food fight every day. She said, I don't know what to do. Can you help me? I said, every day? She said, every day. It's disgusting. I have to have a teacher at every table. You know what I did? I took her to PS 28. I said, let's go visit PS 28 together. They never have food fights. Why? Is the children different, or is it the way we treat the children that's different? The climate that's been created, the culture that's been created. The reason why it's so important to expose people to good education, to good schooling, so they can see, because we have so many people out there who haven't seen it, who end up thinking the problem is the children, and end up blaming the children, blaming their parents. I always say, whenever you find a school like that, you know that school will never improve, because they already have a rationale in their head for why schools can't improve. But I remain optimistic because I get to visit schools like PS 28 and Brockton High School, or a school like Eagle Academy in the South Bronx. Eagle Academy is a school for young men. It was created for the explicit purpose of creating a school where the culture of the school was more powerful than the culture of the streets. Because too many young men were dying, were being lost to gangs, were being incarcerated at a young age. And David Banks decided we need to create a school that gives young men an alternative, a safe place to learn. First time I learned about Eagle Academy was on the train, subway. Anybody who takes the subway in New York City knows the worst time to take the subway is at 3:30. Because that's when school lets out. And the kids are usually loud and they're rambunctious, and here I was on the subway headed uptown, and they were loud. But I see 3 young men on the car in ties. I see one offer his seat to a pregnant passenger, and I said, wow, this is interesting. I think at first maybe they're Mormons. So we have Mormons in the area. I go up, and it turns out they're not Mormons, they're from Eagle Academy. I said, well, who told you? Where are you guys doing? They said, we're coming from the Museum of Natural History, headed uptown. I said, is your teacher with you? He said, no, we know how to get uptown ourselves. I said, well, who taught you to give up your seat like that? And one said, well, that's the way we do things at Eagle. I said, I need to go visit Eagle to learn more about this way. And I find out that the way in which they're going to counter the pull of the streets is by creating a school that deliberately tackles and undermines the stereotypes that would otherwise undermine the children. And how do they do that? By exposing them to a wide variety of activities. So there's a chess team, there's a fencing team, there's a forensics team, there's a robotics team. I got to see the robotics team in action. They have a big robotics championship that goes on every year called US First. And I was one of the judges at the Javits Center, and there they are. The kids are there with their robots, 3,000 young people in this loud music blasting. I'm getting a headache. And I get to tell the kids from Eagle that they'd come in 6th place. They start jumping up and down, celebrating. I said, well, that's good, but not good enough to get to the Georgia Dome because only the top 3 teams from the region go to the finals. And they said, well, we still think it's good. I said, I agree. It was 6 out of 80 teams. And the top 3 teams were which ones? Stuyvesant High School, Bronx High School of Science, and Brooklyn Tech. The exam schools that cream off the highest performing students. They didn't do as well as them, but they came in 6th. So I said, explain to me how you built the robot. The one student takes out a notebook and he explains to me, he tries to explain to me the physics behind the robot, because this is not simply about tinkering with materials. It is, first of all, understanding the concepts behind the way in which the arm on the robot's supposed to move. And if it doesn't do the right thing, they have to go back to the drawing board. And because I couldn't understand any of it, I was especially impressed. I said, well, who helped you build the robot? He said, well, the custodian helped us first. I said, the custodian helped you build the robot? That's right. He said, he got us the parts. We don't know where he gets the parts from, but whenever we need something, he comes through with a part. He's very important. He's very handy. So who else helped you? They said, well, a science teacher helped us. He's sitting in his chair and he's half asleep. I said, wow, he's so tired. And he stirs. He said, that's because I was up till 3 in the morning with these kids. I said, you guys were up till 3 in the morning working on the robot? They said, we were up till 3 in the morning. He said, these kids work weekends, they work evenings. For the last 3 months, we've been working on this robot. I said, you guys work weekends and evenings? They all shook their heads. I said, you guys get extra credit? No. I asked the teacher, do you get paid anymore? He said, not a dime. He said, but their enthusiasm, their commitment kept me coming. Kept me coming. Then I asked these young men, 11 boys, all African-American, Latino young men, I said, what's next? What do you want to do next? You don't get to go to the Georgia Dome, but what do you want to do next? And every single one of them told me the same thing. They said, I want to be mechanical engineers. Now, what's interesting about that is these are kids who come from neighborhoods where there are no mechanical engineers. Hard to dream about something that you've not even been exposed to. But these kids now think they can be mechanical engineers because they were part of something that allowed them to not just dream, but to plan and to aspire concretely to do something very different with their lives. They're lucky to be in a school where it's cool to be smart. Think about that one. It's cool to be smart in your school. I go to a lot of schools where it's not cool, where the kids who are trying to be smart are the nerds who get harassed, because the culture is dysfunctional, the culture is anti-intellectual, the culture is antagonistic, anything but an investment in learning. That's my alarm to say I'm talking too long, so I don't want to do that. So let me stop by saying this. It is not as though it's easy to create schools like Brockton High or PS28 or Eagle. When you go there, it seems easy. When you go to their lunchroom, you see everybody's eating in a civil manner, nobody's throwing food, you say, wow, this is so easy. Until you go to the dysfunctional schools where that's not happening. Then you realize, ooh, they're doing something special here. It's not about a gimmick, though. It's not about some kind of silver bullet. It's never about a silver bullet. Anybody who tells you they got a silver bullet, some new technology, some new curriculum, some new plan, tell them, take their snake oil and go someplace else. Because it always comes down to the same things. Do you have good leadership in place? Leadership with a sense of vision that can inspire and build a sense of community among the staff? Do you have teachers who feel accountable for learning and who are willing to work together to achieve good results with their children? Do you have parents and community that's willing to get engaged to support schools? Because schools can't do it by themselves, and schools need extra resources, and communities have to support their schools. Do you have kids who are willing to invest in their own learning, or a strategy to get them to invest, to get them to care about whether or not they're learning? And do you have a culture that affirms the importance of learning? Over and over again, when you look at the schools that are doing it, and they all look different. They can be very different kinds of places. They can serve affluent kids, poor kids, immigrant kids, kids with special needs, homeless kids. I see a variety of schools that are showing us it is possible to educate all kinds of children. Possible. It's happening right now. What's not possible is to do it when you design policies that actually get in the way, that actually make the job of educating our children more difficult. So my message in conclusion is this. We need to recognize, yes, it is a political issue, shouldn't be, but because it is, then we've got to be engaged. We've got to challenge those who would set the policies to create a different kind of agenda, an agenda that's broader, that's focused not on preparing kids for tests, but on preparing them for life. That's a different kind of education. If our kids get high test scores, but get strung out on drugs, we've still failed. If they get high test scores, but rob banks, even if they're the CEO of that bank, we have still failed, because education that does not come with an ethical foundation, education that does not teach you right from wrong, that does not help you to navigate the world, is an education that's worthless. So I encourage you, fight for an education that's worth it. Fight for an education that can actually help to create a more just, more democratic society, because we really need one. Thank you. You have time?
It's not really a question, it's more of a thank you for the comment you made on Central Falls. I myself am a Central Falls graduate, and I I definitely believe that the teachers are required. I think my teachers still where I am today. It's definitely because of their value to be a teacher. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've been contacted actually by members of the city council in Central Florida to come out there. And one of these days when I get there, really to learn more about what is happening in Central Falls and how they got to that point. But I'm glad to see they're still producing good students. So. Yes.
I liked your comment about teachers learning from teachers because, you know, I've heard a lot of great things about mentoring programs and a lot of schools don't have them. And I've heard of a lot of urban schools from Massachusetts that have them that are very successful because of it. And I just wanted to know how you felt about it because I always wonder why more public schools don't have them.
I would say it's one of the biggest obstacles to improving schools. We have two things going on. We have teachers isolated from each other. So you'll have a very effective teacher who's been really good at what she does right next door to someone who's lost. And no strategy in place for how they can learn from each other in many schools. But on top of that, we will take the least experienced, least effective teacher and assign them to teach the neediest kids. And that's a pretty consistent strategy. Now, there's no research to support that one either. But we do it. And then we see these brand new teachers. I don't want to scare you guys. And they come in, they're 22-year-old, they're bright, they're idealistic. And after a year, they look like they're 45 years old, they're losing their hair. Why? Because they got set up. They got set up with the most challenging class. That's good. We have to save the challenging work for the veterans. Right? Save it for the veterans, the people who actually know what they're doing. And I would say to the teachers, if you're good at what you do, it means you should be good at teaching all kinds of kids, not just the kids who need no help, or little help. Yes.
I'm pretty happy. I'm at the High School in Providence.
So Dennis emailed me and told me to give him a plug for the Met.
Doc Fellow. Which we do some things great, which we have the low economics, we have the struggling kids with the families and trying to incorporate them. But we also are following under commissioners' criteria of what is a career in tech school. We got knocked with our standards last year because of our testing, and then we went testing crazy. So what do you say to Doc or to even the schools that can do one thing really well, but can't meet up to the criteria that the commissioner is asking them to meet to try and keep going?
Well, there's lots of constraints that we work under in real life. So I would say this, that I'm not opposed to standards, having clear standards for what our students should learn in different fields. I think we need clarity, right? And in all the different subjects. Otherwise, we're not doing our true students a service. If we think about this, right now throughout the country, we're seeing large numbers of kids who are graduating from high school, who passed the test, who have taken remedial courses when they get to college. They're really not prepared for college level work, especially in writing, because they don't write enough while they're in school. So I would say that let's use the standards as a basis for making sure we're actually teaching children what they need to learn. Right? So the adults, the professionals, the ones that are getting trained, need to make sure we're actually preparing. At the same time, we have to be creative in how we go about it. That should not mean that we just have to narrowly teach to the test. Right? Now that requires even more skill on the part of teachers. Right? That is to understand how to embed the knowledge and skills and concepts that are going to be on those tests into the lessons, so the children actually are prepared. But that's what they did in Boston. They don't teach the test. They actually believe, their strategy was that our kids did read and write well, their math scores went up. Because so much of math is literacy based. And so their strategy was rooted in the belief, in the faith, that kids who had strong literacy would actually do well in a variety of subjects and it worked. And it has to continue to work. So I would say we have to really think hard about what does it mean to prepare our kids for these standards, but it doesn't mean we have to narrowly teach to the test or bring in capital to take over our schools.
It was really great to hear what you had to say about Brockton, because I'm from Brockton. But I didn't know that. When did that happen?
principal recently. She said, look, our scores went up again, but we're constantly going back and looking at what we're doing, because they're not resting. Right? They're constantly revising, revisiting what they're doing. If you could go online and Google a program on PBS called Need to Know, and there's a whole story that's featured on there about Brockton and how they did it, that goes into much greater depth than I have tonight. But it took place over several years. And that's what's important, because right now, the federal government said we want to turn around failing schools. Turn around, like a wand. Turn around, turn around. That's not how it works. We actually have to first figure out, well, why is it failing? What's wrong here? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to focus on? They focused on literacy.
I'm a graduate, brother. A few years before you. The key, and it is different than when I was a kid. I think what he has said is true, that the key is literacy, and that everybody teaches reading. PE teachers teach
That's
reading.
right.
Everybody teaches writing, and that's actually the key to the success.
Emphasis, reinforcement, consistency. And, Brockton High now is a cool place to be. If, people want to be on the sport, it's 4,000. So at the time when other schools were being told by the Gates Foundation you have to go small, they said, no, we can say big. Because big schools have more resources. Big schools have sports teams, extracurricular activities, AP courses. Can't do that in small schools. But they said we're going to also work on school culture.
Dr. Noguera, if I could get your opinion on the race to the top of what we don't know, but we're racing somewhere.
Right.
And the coming Common Core standards and the coming national test.
Right. So, race to the top, I would say, is a mixed bag. First, I want to give you credit for at least putting federal stimulus money into education at a time when states were so hard hit. So that's a good putting the money there. Much of the other parts of it are bad, and they're not. Again, I say bad because there's no evidence supporting it. There's no evidence support that's requiring states to use test scores as an evaluation of teachers. Where's that? Show me the studies that validate that strategy. Now, I'm not against charter schools. I really am not. But I would say this, charter schools were originally envisioned as laboratories where we would learn, and then what we learned in the charters would then influence what we did elsewhere. They set it up as a competition. So there's no learning that's going on amongst the charters of traditional public schools. So that's a problem. So many features of the law, I think, are highly problematic and I think overly prescriptive and continue it down a path that we've been on that hasn't gotten us very far. Now, I'm not against the common standards. I think we can tinker with them to work to get them right. But I do think, I was in Kentucky earlier this week, and they said, look, if it wasn't for common standards, we wouldn't even know what to do teachers. Because we had no standards, right? And one of the things you saw in the notes up behind was several states had, one of the ways they got their test scores up was just simply lower the threshold, right? So Mississippi, it was looking real good because their test was so easy, right? So Common Core, I think, helps to ensure a degree of consistency around expectations, and I think we should strive for that. At the same time, we have to realize the hard work is figuring out, okay, now how do we get our kids to meet those standards? What do we need to do in terms of teaching, in terms of the organization and resources schools need to get our kids there? That conversation hasn't begun yet. They think they've actually accomplished something with the Common Core, and the real work lies ahead. So, here and then I'll come over here.
So, jumping off that, one of the challenges then, right, of when Common Core comes down is going to be some widespread level of teacher buy-in if they're going to work in terms of whatever strategies you decide to try to use. So, can you talk a little bit about in the Brockton situation or PS28 Eagle, you got to start from scratch. So, but the others that had to go through change and shift, what are the things that you might know around teacher buy-in and how that was built over time?
Well, that's a good question, because the buy-in is the essential ingredient, right? If you don't get everybody on the same page, and then some agreements about how we will do things, schools won't move forward. Now, at Brockton High School, I can't remember the principal's name, because it's a very long Polish name, and I can't pronounce it, but she is a principal who is humble enough to allow teachers to lead. So it was teachers who led the initiative to train other, they came to her with the plan, this is what we need to do. She said, sounds good, let's do it. She didn't feel as though she had to drive it, she had to control it. She basically created an environment that allowed some of our most experienced veteran teachers to lead this effort to train their colleagues. And that brought about a good deal of buy-in. I would say at PS28, I was one of the questions I asked, well, what's your relationship like with your union rep? She said, she's my best ally. We work together because we have the same goal. And they, so it's a lot about the kind of relationship you forge with the union and with your staff. I think that helps to make it possible to move schools. Yes.
I'm in my 7th year teaching in Providence Public Schools now, but when I was at the end of my 4th year, I started to feel in danger of sputtering out because it was feeling so exhausting. And I loved what I did, and there was a teacher in my school who had been teaching for 20 years or so, and he still had so much energy, and the kids really loved him, but he wasn't one of the teachers who the kids loved because he let them do crossword puzzles. And so I said, how do you do it? How do you still have so much energy? And he said, well, I used to do what you do. I used to bring speakers to the whole school, and I used to be the yearbook advisor and the student council, and I went to all the school board meetings, and I did curriculum writing, and I was on the NEAS team. And he said, now all I do is the student stuff. I go to their basketball games, I go to their JROTC competitions. I do things in my own classroom because it's too tiring to try to do things on a larger scale. And I thought that that was really good advice, but it worries me because I've seen a lot of good teachers kind of crawl into their own classrooms because they become disheartened with making larger scale change.
Yeah.
And I don't want that for myself, so I was wondering if you have any advice for a teacher who wants agency, but it's frustrating because there's so much change in administration in schools and in the district level and in the state level, and it's hard to have some kind of consistency and feel like you're making change on a grander scale without getting frustrated.
Well, I think the first thing you did made so much sense was to go find a teacher who was really good at it. And you know how you can find those teachers all the time? Ask the kids. Kids will tell you, just ask the kids, who are the teachers who are really good here? And it's not the kids, the teachers who are letting them do crossword puzzles. Because the kids actually think they're supposed to learn. And so the teachers who are challenging them, the teachers they know, I've come prepared for this teacher, find those teachers. Find allies. You need allies. If you have allies, you'll be less likely to burn out. Allies amongst your colleagues, allies amongst the parents who will support the work, because we need to enlist our parents to support, and then allies amongst the students. The students need support. So my main message is don't let yourself be isolated. That contributes to burnout. That contributes to the sense of this is overwhelming. It's too much. And my bet is that there's lots of other allies there, but who may not be connected to each other. Yes.
When you were talking about PS 28, you said it was Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
Which section of Brooklyn was it in?
Bedford-Stuyvesant.
Okay. Where is that in relation to Park Slope? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I know very well. Not as far away from Park Slope.
I'm not sure about the whole the geographics of it, but she lives in Park Slope. But it's one of the nicer areas.
Right.
Did you notice any disparities between
Huge.
PS 28 and any nearby schools? Like how great were they?
Well, yeah, the obvious disparities, although this PS28 is lucky because it's in a big building, right? So they have a lot of space. That's one of the reasons why she was able to build these partnerships, because she has more space than other schools do. So although it's in a very poor community, the facility itself is pretty good. It's not like a new building by any means. It's probably built in the 20s or 30s, but it is big, and that she's able to use that space to do a lot of different programs for her students. But the inequities, the disparities are pretty stark. The schools in Park Slope or Tribeca, they have PTAs that can raise over $100,000. There was one school parents raised over $500,000 a year. Her school obviously can't do that. And so, though that results in even greater discrepancies in resources.
Okay, so I'm kind of in that in-between stage with the post-grad and not quite the teacher yet. I'm a teacher assistant right now, and my biggest frustration, I think, is how do I keep myself not just marketable, but not sucked into the whole, I see so many new teachers so quickly get sucked into the whole teaching for the test and by the standards because they're new, they get overrun by older teachers, and then they lose that new zing they came in with. How do I keep myself from that? How do I continue educating myself when I'm in this, kind of stuff in between stage?
There was a book written in the 70s called Teaching is a Subversive Activity. I'd recommend that one to you. One of the great things about teaching is that when they close the door, no one really knows, except you and the kids, what's going on. That gives you the chance to be creative. Teaching is both art and skill. Right? And what makes teaching as a profession, a rewarding profession, makes it possible to feel good still after 20 years, is when you keep the creative part alive, right, in it. And it's that part which will make your kids want to be in your class, want to learn from you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can ignore the standards or ignore what they're supposed to learn in whatever grade it is you're teaching. But it does mean that you get to bring your character, your personality, whatever else you can do to enhance that curriculum, make it come to life, bring it. I was visiting a first grade classroom in Baltimore, and they are using science to promote literacy in Baltimore. Right? Because it turns out that the science curriculum and the literacy curriculum are very well aligned, because they all involve inquiry, they all involve higher order thinking. And this teacher, she brings a hermit crab into the classroom. She's got everybody's attention. Because they want to know, what is that? Where does he live? and no one told her to do that. She didn't have permission. And the hermit crab's not going to be on the test. Right? But she knew she needs to, if she doesn't have their attention, she's not going to teach them anything. And if she can find a way to connect them so they actually want to write about this crab now, well, what better way to get kids to write than to find a way to entice them into it. So I don't think you have to compromise the creativity. Now, unfortunately, if you're in a school where there are curriculum police out there who are monitoring you to knock on your door and see what you're doing, then you have to really be careful. That's why I read that book about subversive activities. Because I was going to get fired before you get started. But be careful, but don't be afraid to be creative.
Great.
Thank you.
So it's so wonderful having Pedro this evening to sort of start the conversation. We expect to see everyone tomorrow morning, bright and early, over at Global, where we set up some breakout sessions. I think you'll enjoy those. We have a morning plenary session, an afternoon plenary session, which is really interesting opportunities for discussion. While we're here, I'd like to acknowledge people who helped put this conference together. Again, we hope that this will be the first conference in an annual series of conferences on education. I'd like to thank the program committee, and if they don't mind standing, anyone who is not here, she's at a conference, but Kelly Darnell, Kerry Lucci, Bruce Marlowe. If you have not registered for tomorrow's sessions, don't bother, just come. And you can register, when you get here. Bring your friends.
How much does it cost?
Actually, if you remember, I thanked the office of the provost and that of the president. And also, I'd like to acknowledge Bob Cole here, also, who's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, who's really been very supportive in this really important work. But I want you to know that it doesn't cost anything, because the office of the provost and the office of the president have funded the conference. Just a nuts and bolts thing. I don't know where you park. But you can park tomorrow behind the administration office. That gate will be open. And there's also a parking lot here near the tennis courts, parking lot H. And Global Heritage Hall is, if you're facing the library, it's on the bay side. In fact, overlooks Mount Hope Bay. So I'm going to be there bright and early, but I think our first session starts at 8:30. And there will be refreshments, of which they're free as well. So thank you, Pedro. Very, great start. We're going to